Hidden behind steel doors lie the greatest stories the auto world forgot. From factory wars to near-death legends, this is Vaulted Wheels, unlocking the machines that built America.
Picture the early 1970s. Car design is about to experience a violent, radical shift, and right at the epicenter of that earthquake is a multi-million-dollar UFO on wheels. Welcome to this explainer where we're untangling the cinematic mystery of a vehicle so extreme, it literally looked like it dropped out of orbit. We're going to explore a rolling sculpture that completely challenged everything the auto industry thought it knew about engineering, safety, and how humans interact with machines. But here is the real hook. How exactly does a visionary, one-off supercar, built on a race-bred chassis and designed by the most famous automotive architect of the century, just vanish from the global stage? And how on earth does it end up in the hands of a cabaret owner in Benidorm, Spain, for 6 whole years? You see, this isn't just a story about horsepower or sheet metal. This is the wild story of a masterpiece that was mocked, discarded, secretly rescued, and eventually vindicated by time. When this thing first debuted as a non-functional model at the Turin Motor Show back in November 1971, it completely short-circuited the press. The extreme wedge shape was so visually aggressive that one motoring journalist famously claimed it looked like it was doing 100 miles an hour standing still. I mean, it was the silent, static block of geometry that looked less like a car and more like a door shim with wheels. It was an absolute provocation. And to give you an idea of the stakes here, decades after its initial mockery and that mysterious disappearance, this exact same prototype, the only one ever built, mind you, sold at the 2015 Chantilly auction for nearly $4 million. It went from a discarded, forgotten experiment into an irreplaceable piece of industrial art. Experts basically described it as something you could proudly display in your living room right next to a Monet or a Giacometti sculpture. Which brings us to Section 1, Drawing with a Ruler. To really understand this massive shift, we've got to meet the mind behind the madness, visionary designer Giorgetto Giugiaro. He's often called the Bernini of the 20th century, and by the time he was 21, he was already managing styling centers. But with the Boomerang, Giugiaro decided it was time to stop following industry trends and start intentionally provoking them. You know, before this moment, a conventional car interior was a pretty safe, predictable space. The 1960s were all about these organic, muscular curves meant to mimic skin and muscle, paired with flat dashboards and scattered analog dials. Well, Giugiaro violently rejected all of that. He threw out those traditional French curves, grabbed a ruler and a T-square, and basically birthed the sharp, folded paper era of automotive design. He was completely obsessed with mathematical proportion and brutal geometric purity. Let's move into Section 2, the Rolling Manifesto. So Giugiaro didn't just want to create a new silhouette on the outside. He designed what was essentially a rolling manifesto meant to completely shatter traditional cabin architecture. The Boomerang wasn't trying to be just another high-performance sports car. It was an extreme dream car, a vision into a future totally unburdened by rationality. But he firmly believed that functionality validates the project, and he was determined to prove that extreme geometry could actually work. He pioneered a radical new human-machine interface by completely eliminating the traditional dashboard. Up until then, driving was heavily fragmented. You had to look left, right, up, and down just to read your gauges. He realized that to push design forward, he had to entirely rethink how a human physically interacts with a machine from the exact second they sit down. And his solution was absolutely wild. He consolidated every single gauge and switch into a stationary steering hub. The steering wheel itself was reduced to a spokeless outer rim that rotated on a hidden track entirely around a fixed central console. It's a brilliant concentric design. It ensured that the driver's view of the speedometer and tachometer was never, ever obstructed by moving steering wheel spokes, no matter how sharply they threw the car into a corner. He pushed the envelope aggressively everywhere else, too. He raked the windshield back at a severe 13-degree angle. Now, at the time, contemporary glass manufacturers mocked this as absolute heresy. They told him it was stupid and assumed it would cause massive optical distortion, terrible heat issues, and zero visibility. But Giugiaro basically just ignored them. He was totally confident that his mathematical packaging would hold up perfectly in the real world. But let's look at the objective facts of actually driving this thing. Despite its visionary, futuristic aesthetic, getting behind the wheel was physically taxing. Because those front wheel wells were so intrusive just to maintain that crazy wedge shape, the pedal box had to be heavily offset. Drivers actually reported having to sit sideways, literally contorted like a banana, just to reach the pedals. And reaching through that rotating spokeless rim to flip a simple rocker switch for the headlights, critics vividly described it as feeling like you were turning a massive industrial valve, or my personal favorite, opening the Alaska pipeline.
That brings us to Section 3, more than a show car.
Because by the March 1972 Geneva Motor Show, the Boomerang was no longer just a silent, wooden styling glider. This wasn't just a hollow shell meant to look pretty under the auto show lights. Italdesign had actually dropped this geometric, folded paper shell onto a fully registered, functional Maserati Bora chassis. This gave the Boomerang serious, legitimate supercar pedigree. We're talking about a mid-mounted, all-aluminum, race-bred 4.7-liter V8 pumping out 310 horsepower. It was a fully independent, dual-wishbone road vehicle capable of a theoretical top speed of 300 kilometers per hour. To put that into perspective, this Martian wedge made contemporary Ferraris and the Lamborghini Miura look genuinely nervous. But here is a truly fascinating hidden detail. To make that stationary hub work safely, engineers secretly devised a brilliant workaround. Obviously, they couldn't use a standard steering column, so they implemented a segmented column connected by a flexible drive chain. And this wasn't just some quick design hack. It was a massive safety innovation. It was intentionally designed to fold and collapse in a crash, rather than impaling the driver like older rigid columns used to do. They even left that massive central hub hollow on purpose, specifically to reserve space for an airbag, a technology that was still just in its absolute infancy back in 1972. Now for Section 4, Exile in a Nightclub. Yet, despite being a functional masterclass in both styling and engineering, this priceless artifact was just cast aside. You see, in the 1970s, it really wasn't uncommon for coach builders to just sell off their one-of-a-kind concept cars the second they had served their marketing purpose. And in a truly cinematic twist, the Boomerang was essentially exiled. After its auto show tour wrapped up in 1974, it was sold to a cabaret and nightclub owner in Benidorm, Spain. And it just sat there for 6 years. That is, until 1980, when a German Maserati enthusiast on holiday miraculously recognized its unmistakable wedge profile. And in this incredible stroke of irony, this specific tourist was so obsessed with the car's design that he actually already owned a small-scale toy model of it back home. He bought the real thing right there on the spot, rescuing it from its nightclub purgatory. Which leads us to Section 5, Blueprint for the Future. Following a really meticulous mechanical and cosmetic restoration by marquee specialists and a triumphant return to the concours circuit at the 1990 Bagatelle Concours in Paris, we can finally look back at the Boomerang's true impact. Because while it spent years hiding in a Spanish cabaret, the ideas it introduced were busy taking over the world. This single car served as the architectural DNA for the next 50 years of automotive design. I mean, its sharp geometry was translated directly into the Volkswagen Golf M1, a car that sold over 30 million units and effectively saved VW from bankruptcy. Giugiaro even called the iconic Lotus Esprit a domesticated boomerang, proving his heretical windshield rake actually worked. It clearly inspired the DeLorean DMC-12, and incredibly, that Mach stationary steering hub, it directly predicted modern Formula One wheels and is the exact same design philosophy being used right now in the brand new multi-million-dollar Bugatti Tourbillon. Decades later, Giugiaro looked back on his creation and heavily criticized the modern auto industry's absolute obsession with distracting digital touchscreens. He famously stated that there's no need to go to Disneyland when everything is already inside the car. He firmly insisted that the Boomerang's philosophy, this highly tactile, centralized physical control, was a far more honest, direct connection between a driver and their machine than, just tapping on a glowing piece of glass. The Boomerang remains one of the most important rolling sculptures in history. It wasn't a failure of rationality, it was a prophecy of centralization. It stands as this incredibly rare example of a concept that perfectly bridged the gap between pure artistic sculpture and brutal mechanical performance. It didn't try to predict what was next. Instead, it chose to confidently and brilliantly ignore the rules of its own time. Which really leaves us with one final thought for this explainer. In today's era of safe, homogeneous, wind tunnel-tested vehicles, who will be the next designer brave enough to draw with a ruler?